Hi, I'm David Temple. I'm the president of the Medfield Historical Society still. Welcome to you all. I imagine most of you are here because you learned about the presentation through the portal, the Historical Society's newsletter. If you don't already get the portal, you can subscribe free if you go to medfieldhistoricalsociety.org and scroll down to the bottom of the home page. Please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. There will be an opportunity for questions and comments at the end. Tonight, we are privileged to have Gloria Greis back. Several years ago, Gloria was in Medfield to talk about America's first large-scale amusement park built in the late 19th century. It occupied 800 acres, included a 225-room luxury hotel, and it was in Needham, of all places, near the Charles River and the Dover-Wellesley line. Tonight, she'll be talking about the Green Book, the publication, which many of us didn't know about before Green Book, the movie, which won the Oscar for Best Picture 4 years ago. The movie starred Mahershala Ali as Don Shirley, a superbly talented black pianist, and Viggo Mortensen as a bouncer from the Bronx who was hired to drive Shirley around and protect him on a concert tour of the Deep South in 1962. I have many records by Don Shirley, who I think was a wonderful pianist with a unique style and niche. But in the 2+ hour movie, there is less than 1 minute of Shirley actually playing. The rest is by a lesser pianist. I encourage you to go to YouTube and give a listen to Don Shirley. That's the end of my rant about the Green Book, the movie. In the Jim Crow area, the publication known as the Green Book helped African-American travelers find good, safe accommodations and restaurants across the United States, including in Massachusetts. I'm hopeful that this will be our last presentation via Zoom. I have speakers lined up for October and November, and I hope we'll be meeting in our usual place, which is the old meeting house, AKA the Unitarian Church. The October speaker just gave the Society one of the most important gifts we've ever added to our collection. Meanwhile, I welcome future program ideas from you in the audience. What would you like to hear about? If you've been to any talks lately that you might recommend for this. If you have any ideas, please call me or send me an email. The Society, as you know, is a very small building with zero ventilation, and we've been pretty much closed to browsers during the pandemic. However, I'm always happy to help researchers, and if you just call me or send me an email, if need be, I can open the building for you for a visit. Now, without further ado, let me turn the meeting over to Dr. Gloria Greis, Executive Director of the Needham History Center.
Thank you, David. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight to the talk. I do apologize for the sudden change of schedule, so I appreciate that you did make the change. I'm going to share my screen. As David said, I'm Gloria Greis. I'm the Executive Director of the Needham History Center and Museum, and want to thank you again for being here. When we're done, as David said, we're going to go back to the big window, and we'll have a chance to ask questions, discuss the material. And I'd especially be interested to hear if you have had any experience with the Green Book or remember traveling in segregated areas of the country. It'll be interesting to discuss that. A few years ago, a local resident sent me a note saying, "Did you know that there's a Needham entry in the Green Book?" And I said, "Well, no, I didn't know there was a Needham entry in the Green Book. In fact, I didn't actually even know what the Green Book was." And so I looked it up, and that's sort of how this story began. But I dare say I was not alone in my ignorance, and I dare say that my ignorance says something about the gaps in the way we approach our local history. These are a couple of pages from the Massachusetts page of the Green Book, just to give you an idea of what the listings look like. And we'll be back to this in a little more detail later. Despite the general sense that modern history is comprehensive and that everything is known, the historical record is surprisingly incomplete. Records get lost or are not recorded in the first place. In a town like Needham, which was literate but not literary, recorded history is mostly found in the official documents. Those are the tax rolls, the town clerk's records, the church registers, the town reports. But this is the history of the town leaders, the office holders, the property owners, the clergy. While this information is indeed important, it is also incomplete as a town history. It leaves out large segments of the community's experience, all the things that were once so familiar and seemingly unimportant that nobody thought to write them down. The experience of the working class, the routine rhythms of work and leisure, the accommodations of neighborhood, and the attitudes, opinions, and relationships that governed everyone's daily life. One mainstay of historical research in Needham is George Kuhn Clark's 900-page History of Needham from 1711 to 1911. In Medfield, you have something similar. You have William Tilden's History of the Town of Medfield, 1650 to 1886. Clark is a great resource, and he exhaustively compiles the official town documents that would be otherwise difficult to access and compare. But Clark is very focused only on the established institutions, and he barely mentions slavery. He only mentions women activists like suffragists in the context of their husbands. If you depended upon Clark, you could easily come away with the impression that Needham was not only devoid of African Americans, but also of Native Americans, women, non-British Europeans, Catholics, Jews, and children. Nevertheless, I am reasonably sure that there were women in Needham and also probably a few children, African Americans, Native Americans, and the rest. And I particularly like this picture because you notice that little boy right in the center is African American. He's in a group of probably 300-400 other children. This is the opening day photo for this new school. He is the only African American child in the picture, but we would otherwise have no record that he was even there at all. I should also note that Tilden was much more forthright on the topic of enslavement in Medfield. I had a quick chance to look through the book. I didn't obviously delve very deeply into how inclusive he was overall. But what this means for us as historians is that piecing together the historical information about non-establishment groups often takes a number of different strategies and resources. You don't find all of this in the big, thick book. Records are incomplete and everything is not known. You find a clue, such as this photograph, and then you follow the breadcrumbs and you hope that they lead you someplace. The Green Book is one such breadcrumb. The 2018 movie, The Green Book, introduced a wider audience to this lesser known but important artifact of our national life. The movie was based on a true story following African-American pianist Don Shirley, played by Marshala Ali, and his Italian-American driver bodyguard, Tony Vallelonga, played by Viggo Mortensen, as they travel through the Jim Crow South for a concert tour in 1962. The movie's title refers to a guidebook that Shirley's promoter gives to Tony as they hit the road, the Negro Motorist Green Book, or more simply, the Green Book. This was Tony's first inkling about what they might be getting themselves into. The Green Book was the brainchild of Victor Hugo Green, hence the title, a mail carrier and travel agent from New York. The purpose of the Green Book was to list the businesses, restaurants, sleeping accommodations, entertainment, vacation resorts, and other facilities that welcomed African-American travelers. As Green wrote in his introduction, with the introduction of this travel guide, it has been our idea to give the Negro traveler information that will keep him from running into difficulties, embarrassments, and to make his trips more enjoyable. There will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we, as a race, will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for us to suspend this publication. But then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. But until that time comes, we shall continue to publish this information for your convenience each year. For the first few editions, the cover bore the advice, keep this guide in your car for ready reference. After 1947, that changed more ominously to carry your Green Book with you. You may need it. Although we tend to think of restricted access and segregation as being characteristic of the Jim Crow South, these limits were imposed on African Americans all over the country, even in the North. We might not have had the actual signs, but we had the signals. In New York, for example, in the 1930s, there were very few hotels that would take in Black guests. And although Harlem was one of the fastest growing Black communities in the country, its famous Cotton Club, known worldwide for showcasing Black musical talent, did not accept Black customers in the audience. But the 1930s also saw growth in the African American population of cities throughout the northern part of the country. As the nation emerged from depression, industries were growing fast and needed labor. The industrial cities like Detroit were friendly ground for Black people seeking work, and people moved there in large numbers. The auto manufacturers especially were willing to hire at good wages. One result was that both economic status and car ownership among African Americans began to rise. So as more African Americans entered the middle class after World War II, there was a corresponding increase in both leisure and business travel. Nevertheless, the persistence of discrimination and segregation meant that Black travelers could not rely upon businesses to serve them. The Green Book guided them to businesses where they were welcome, reducing what Green kindly called aggravation, meaning that they could be served without insult, humiliation, or conflict. The Green Book existed not only to provide assurance and comfortable travel for Black tourists, but also to try and make that travel more safe. There were towns that were not just unwelcoming, but actually hostile. There were the so-called sundown towns, with signs warning both Black residents and visitors of the curfew. Don't let the sun go down on you here. These were especially prevalent in the Southwest and the upper Midwest. Breaking curfew could mean jail time or worse. Black travelers also needed to be aware that there were long stretches of road, like on Route 66 through the Southwest, on which there were no welcoming businesses, that you might need to make a detour if you needed a meal or a restroom. The Green Book was published from 1937 until 1966, and it grew in scope every year. The first issue in 1937 covered parts of New York and Westchester County and was just 16 pages long. But in a short time, the Green Book expanded from covering the New York area to covering the whole nation and parts of the Caribbean, with 100 pages and including more than 9,500 businesses. At its height, it sold 15,000 copies a year and was sold by both Black and white vendors. And in this image, you could see the one on the left, New York City, is a page from the 1937 edition, which, as I said, was quite short, quite local. And the 1962 edition, which is one of the largest ones, you can see it stretches through the United States, Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, and includes hotels, motels, restaurants, tourist homes, vacation resorts. And the images, which we'll mention in a few minutes, are typical vacation images, the kinds of things that everybody expects to see on a vacation brochure. Green used his network of mail carriers to identify Black-owned businesses and to spread the word. He also solicited information from travelers to recommend places where they had stayed. By 1940, the U.S. Travel Bureau was working with Green to add information to the book. SO Oil, which was notable for its progressive hiring, including African American executives, scientists, and franchisees, distributed the book widely through its service station network. Quote, "That is why SO is glad to make our customers acquainted with the Green Book, which enables them to go farther with less anxiety. Bless the Green Book and its service." By the 1960s, more than 2 million people carried the Green Book. As it grew, the book also became a major force in promoting Black-owned businesses nationwide. This was especially a boon to small businesses, and especially women-owned businesses like beauty salons, restaurants, and travel homes, because it gave them widespread, essentially nationwide, notice. Victor Green created a travel service through the guide, which promoted vacation resorts. For example, Idlewild, Michigan, not too far from Cadillac, grew into one of the largest resort communities in the Midwest, with more than 25,000 visitors on summer weekends. Its clubs featured world-famous performers like Count Basie, Sarah Vaughan, and Nat King Cole, who, despite their fame, were still subject to segregation rules in other venues. Like pianist Don Shirley in the film, being famous and being in demand did not exempt you from the societal limitations of being Black in a segregated country. Throughout its run, the Green Book promoted vacation without aggravation, the understanding that a traveler goes on vacation in order to relax, have fun, and leave the daily cares behind for a few days. Although originated by the darker truth that vacation and relaxation could not be taken for granted by African Americans, the overall tone of the volumes was one of fun, places to go, things to see, activities to enjoy. But the underlying tone of fun, there was always the voice of advocacy. It was there in Green's early introduction. There will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for us to suspend this publication, for then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. But until that time comes, we shall continue to publish. It was there in the partnerships that Green formed with the U.S. Travel Bureau and Esso Oil to promote the book and the businesses that it included. In promoting and facilitating the notion that Blacks had just as much right to travel and recreation as whites, and implicit in the way Black people were portrayed in his book, prosperous, adventurous, ready to spend their money. This was not the way that Black people were often portrayed in American popular culture, letting Green push back on stereotypes and portray African Americans as valuable potential customers. And these are images. This is the 1936 book. You see those folks with their suitcases all dressed up and ready to go on vacation. These are for 62 again, horseback riding, dancing. These are vacation activities, middle-class vacation activities. And this raises another topic. The Green Book was an explicitly middle-class phenomenon. It was aimed at the middle class. It promoted businesses and interests, the businesses and interests and the image of the middle class. Travel was for people with disposable income. For poorer people, African American laborers and farm workers in the more rural parts of the country, or for lower wage workers in the cities, the Green Book was not relevant and was pretty much unknown. Only in the last two issues, 1964 and 1966, does the book become overtly political, highlighting the provisions of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In these two issues, the introduction veered away from its usual vacation without aggravation message to make sure that its readers knew that the new legislation outlawed, even if it did not yet eliminate, the kinds of discrimination that made the Green Book necessary in the first place: civil rights, facts versus fiction. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is a new Bill of Rights for everyone, regardless of race, creed, or color. Public accommodations, effective at once. Every hotel, restaurant, theater, or other facility catering to the general public must do exactly that. 31 state laws already in effect have even stronger provision. This was followed by a list of each state and the relevant laws in each. As you can see, a fragment of that: California, Colorado, Connecticut, letting you know that each state to which you traveled, what the specific provisions of the Civil Rights Act were. The Green Book ceased publication after the 1966-1967 edition. Green himself had passed away in 1960, though the company kept going under the direction of his wife Alma for those last few years. But the time that Green had hoped for had come. In law, at least, his guide was no longer necessary. And the desegregation of travel was also facilitated by the interstate highway system that grew rapidly in the 1960s. Nationwide companies commandeered the roadsides, interested in promoting a homogeneous brand that would serve them regardless of location. Interstate traffic bypassed the local roads and businesses, and also the local attitudes. Of course, many of the businesses bypassed were the same businesses that had been the mainstays of the Green Book. With more choices available, Black travelers were no longer constrained to stay only at Black-owned motels or eat only at Black-owned restaurants. As I said at the beginning, This all started with a question about the Green Book listing in Needham. And although most of the Green Book listings for Massachusetts were in the cities, and this is the complete Massachusetts listing for the 1948 edition, although most were in the cities, there were a few in the suburbs, and the numbers grew as the years passed. You can see, obviously Boston, Roxbury, but also Hanson, Stockbridge, Swampscott, Worcester, and of course, Needham. From 1937 until 1960, there was one listing in Needham for Mrs. Blanche Chapman, who kept a tourist home at 799 Central Avenue. The house itself is no longer standing. It was built in 1870 and was torn down and replaced in 2014. Living in Needham Heights, Mrs. Chapman shared a neighborhood that was until recently the home of the working class, the recent European immigrant, and the congregations that were new to Needham, that is Methodist, Catholic, and Jewish. But although Needham Heights had several ethnic enclaves, there was no Black neighborhood. In fact, there were only 19 African Americans in all of Needham at the 1930 census, out of about 11,000 residents overall. In all of Blanche Chapman's immediate neighbors were employed as farmers, laborers, or tradesmen, and all except her family were white. According to the 1940 census, Mrs. Chapman was then 50 years old and living in the house with her son William and daughter-in-law Annie. She had completed the 8th grade, she was divorced, and her occupation is listed as sewing, for which she earned $200 in 1939 for 20 weeks' work, which was a better wage than some of her neighbors. The Needham street list for 1940 identified her as a cook. From 1950 to 1960, Mrs. Chapman was in sole possession of the house, and the street list identified her as a proprietor. Although she disappeared from the Green Book in 1960, the Needham street list continued to list her as a proprietor until 1975, so presumably she continued to take in travelers. After 1976, she was listed as retired. The house changed hands in 1978, at which point she would have been over 90 years old. I don't know how many African American travelers came through Needham, but if they did, they had a place to stay. Blanche Chapman did not get rich by taking in lodgers, but with the help of the Green Book, she did well enough to live in a peaceful town, own her own home, and live an independent life. It is easy to see the Green Book only as an artifact of discrimination and segregation in American society. Indeed, those were the forces that made it necessary. But see it also as a testament to the political and economic agency and social progress. The Green Book is a compendium of some of the most important people, successful businesses, and important political milestones of the 20th century. It is a who's who of the African American middle class entrepreneur. A detailed record of their successes, risks, aspirations, innovations, and cooperation. A detailed record, Yoruba Richin, in her documentary about the Green Book, noted that the book encapsulated not only the seriousness of traveling while Black, but also the love and support that strengthened the community, held it together, and kept it going along the road. I would be happy to entertain any questions or comments that anybody might have.
Is there anything like the Green Book now? I mean, it makes me wonder if there might be Green Books for other ethnic minorities or something that sprung up. I've never heard of it.
I'm sure there are. I'm sure that communities share information about places that are more comfortable to go, especially if there are dietary restrictions or some other such consideration that might not be easy to find everywhere. I think one of the issues about a book like the Green Book itself was that it came at a time when segregation was legal. I think right now to say publicly that you need to do this because segregation is legally more problematic. So I'm sure a lot of information is shared within communities, but I don't think there's a sort of, officially published kind of guide that I know of that has the same connotations. I'm sure there are, and I know there are plenty of, guides that are keyed toward specific ethnic groups or specific interests. Sorry, it's 8:00, but not with the same intent to circumvent an issue the same way segregation was. It's a nice clock. It's noisy. Okay.
I thought you had a wonderful presentation. It was really very interesting. I had never heard of the Green Book either until the movie came along. So it was nice to see that there were places in Massachusetts even, but it was kind of sad that places in Massachusetts were required.
Yeah, and that's, as we've been doing more and more research, not only on this, but on 19th century and 18th century issues like enslavement, we sort of grow up secure in the notion that we're Northerners and therefore we're good guys.
Yeah.
When it comes to race relations and inclusion, and we're always somewhat wounded to find out that we were not, in fact, the good guys. And we did a presentation 3 years. COVID is like this big sort of blip, but it was actually originally 3 years now. When we started to do research about enslavement in Needham, and we posted the talk on Facebook, and we got all this pushback. You're causing trouble. You're trying to cause trouble. You're causing controversy. Like we had, some have made this up for some reason. Yeah. And, so we had to sort of bring the documentation and say, no, look here, our minister, our first minister was a slaveholder, and according to Tilden, so was yours. But which was not uncommon among ministers in those days. But yeah, we, there's a lot of untapped information about include, or the lack of inclusion, lack of diversity in the North that we kind of gloss over, so we could point fingers southward that we're starting to try and come to terms with now.
I was very surprised in watching the Franklin documentary last night to learn that Franklin was a slave owner.
Yeah,
it seems so contrary to what your image of Franklin.
Yeah, it's sort of the Puritan Church did not consider slaveholding to be a sin. Didn't consider it to be, it was attested in the Bible. There were slaves in the Bible. So it took a long time for that sense of injustice to seep back into American political and social thought.
I did see I think we were in Alabama driving from Boston to Little Rock, Arkansas, with my aunt and uncle. And we stopped someplace at a gas station, and my uncle told me to come with him. Went around the back of the gas station. He said, I want to be sure you see this. It was what was labeled a colored toilet. The door was hanging on one hinge. There was no male, female. It was just colored, period. Yeah. And I still see that to this day.
Someone was telling me, I think last time when I did this talk in Needham a couple months ago, and one woman mentioned that they stopped on the highway and the bathrooms for African Americans were across the highway.
Yeah.
So, there was a bathroom, but you had to run across a busy road to get to it. It was the accommodations had to be made, but they were not made gracefully or easily in a lot of cases.
Properly.
Yeah. I was when I was little, we moved from New York to Florida for a couple of years. And that was just before the interstate ran south of Baltimore. So sort of once you passed Baltimore, you were on the local highways, the state highways. And it was an eye-opening experience for a New Yorker. Yeah, Donald.
I got out of college in 1963 and had to go into the military in the South. So I had to drive through Virginia and Georgia. And it was my first exposure to segregation. I had never seen white only or bathrooms or restaurants. And it was a real eye opener for somebody 20, 21 years old. It was never explained to me in the North that I would run into this, but I did, and part of my education.
Yeah, but I think it too that in the North, it was always, it wasn't not there, but it was less overt. As I mentioned with the Cotton Club, for example, not taking, looking, voraciously consuming African-American talent, but not allowing African-American customers. They didn't have the sign posted on the wall, but by the same token, you wouldn't be seated.
Good.
If we would like to see a copy of a Green Book, is there does the Medfield Library have one, or do you have one in Needham?
We actually were given a copy of, I think it's like probably 1948, because that's the one I seem to have the most scans from. But there is going to the New York Public Library, which is, okay, no. So I'm just widescreen myself again, so I couldn't see what I was doing. New York Public Library has a complete digitized collection. So if you go online, it's digitalcollections.nypl.org /collections, and then search for the Green Book. They have every volume from 1937 to 1966 digitized, and you can see them as PDFs. There's actually, I'm going to share screen for a second. I had a couple of resources that I put up. So there's, I mentioned Yoruba Richard's film, which is available on the Smithsonian Channel for free stream, which is quite good. It's about an hour long. She did a documentary for them about the Green Book and the rise of the African-American middle class in the mid-century. And there's two other, Gretchen Soren, she did a film with Rick Burns called Driving While Black, and also a book called Keep Going that are also about this.
I read a book called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel, somebody else will know her last name. But there's a lot in that that reflects the conditions in the South in the Green Book era.
Yeah. Yeah, we read that in our book group a couple of years ago. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
If not, I'd say thank you very much for Gloria.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
Very
nice.
good.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let me remind people in the audience, again, the website is medfieldhistoricalsociety.org. You can go onto it to get a lot of information about Medfield's rich history, and you can sign up there for our newsletter, The Portal. Anyway, I would say have a good summer. Hope to see you in the fall. Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.